Here's a little intro to thinning the geometry of a knife. Here I have a 220 grit stone that looks pretty flat, but I'm going to check the flatness by making hatch marks with the pencil, making sure I have full coverage of the stone. This is a diamond flattening stone, specifically made for flattening, sharpening stones. As you can see, with just a few passes, there's a little dip in the center, which is pretty normal for sharpening. It's much easier to use the center of the stone than the edges. And you just flatten, flatten, flatten until all the pencil's gone. And then you want to round off your edges of your stone. That'll make it safer during sharpening so you don't bite into the edge with a sharp corner of the stone. Next, take a Sharpie and blacken it out. You don't have to go all the way up to the spine because you shouldn't be touching the spine to the stone, but you want a good 3/4 to an inch from the edge up to the spine. Next, I'm just going to lay that bevel down and concentrating pressure on the edge. You'll see that it grinds away the Sharpie where it's touching the stone. And here I have a semi-consistent grind pattern, but the more that I flatten or thin the bevel, the more consistent you'll see that those scratches below that Sharpie towards the edge are going to be. Here it looks pretty consistent, but there's a spot near the tip, and you'll see me point it out here in a second, right around there. And so now I'm going to put my pressure a little bit higher away from the edge, and you can see it's already starting to grind a little bit of metal. Now I've gotten all the Sharpie off, so that geometry has been thinned by just a little bit. It's not taking a lot of metal off, but if you do this every time you sharpen, your knife will cut more consistently and at a higher performance. This is a 800 grit diamond stone I've moved to, and I'm basically just trying to get rid of a lot of the deep scratches from the 220 grit stone. Now we're going to Sharpie the edge, only about the width of the Sharpie's tip up the edge. Now I'm concentrating pressure behind the edge. What you'll see is that after this first pass, only a little bit of that Sharpie was touching, and that's because I'm using pressure to remove metal behind that edge. And now this motion I'm making is what's called rolling over the corner. So there's a little bit of an apex between your primary bevel and your secondary bevel. And what I'm doing is I'm using a little bit of English in the right hand just to twist up like maybe 1 degree. Every push stroke forward, I'm twisting my wrist, just putting a little bit of pressure, and you see it's just enough to take away all that Sharpie. So I'm blending the shape of the bevel down to the edge using just a little bit of twisting motion in the hand. That's where the handle would be. And here I'm doing it on the other side, putting the pressure behind the edge. And you'll see that it's only removing a little bit of the Sharpie behind that bevel. And now I'm going to be using just a little bit of that twisting motion to blend that flattened bevel into the primary area of the cutting edge. This helps convex the bevel so that it's not flat. You don't want it to be dead flat or else it's going to have a lot of stiction. This is a 4,000 grit stone, and I'm doing my hatch marks again. I think this is the first time I've used this stone, so it takes a long time. Specifically this stone, which is a very hard-wearing 4,000 grit stone. It's going to take me quite a while using a couple of aggressive flattening plates. But eventually it gets flat and most of the pencil's off, at least in the primary part of where you're going to be working with the stone, which is in the center. And then I round off the corners like always. In the beginning here, I'm working all areas of that 3/4 of an inch behind the edge just to get rid of the scratches, to give it a little bit of a shine, get the deep scratches out. And then I'm going to mark up the edge with the Sharpie again. And what I'm doing here is I'm now sharpening at an angle that you would sharpen the edge at, from 15 to 20 degrees. And the reason I'm doing this is because if this was a very well-used knife and you sharpened it, there'd be a very obvious bevel. But you can see that the only part of the steel that's touching that stone is a hairline edge of metal. So that's how I know the knife is properly thinned.